Okay, who was Muhammad Ali? Anybody, you remember any historical information about him?
Of Armenian descent.
Albanian descent.
Albanian.
Yeah.
Sorry. He was of Albanian descent. He was sent by the Ottomans originally to be governor of Egypt, but then he kind of took it over and became autonomous.
Yes. Yes. And he was a reformer who wanted to establish links with Europe in terms of education to modernize the country. And it's interesting actually that there was an earlier design for this building done by a French architect who was working in Cairo. He also later worked in Iran, Pascal Coste. He has volumes on the architecture of Cairo and of Iran, which are available in the Rare Book Library here, should you wish to peruse them. And he submitted a design for this building, which was originally in Mamluk style. Now, is there any reason you can think of why Muhammad Ali wouldn't have been too excited about building a mosque in Mamluk style?
It's modern.
Well, no.
Well, is this a modern design? I mean, for the early 19th century, that is.
I suppose that if you're trying to instigate further ties with Europe, the Mamluks fought Europeans, but like I'm not really sure if that's. I'll just wipe them away.
He actually had a little war with the remaining Mamluks.
He expelled them.
No, he massacred them. Invited them for a banquet at the Citadel, blocked off the alleyway in which they were arriving and had his soldiers fire on them from the top of the walls. So he really didn't want to be reminded of Mamluk rule in his country. So instead he picked an Ottoman design. Zainab, looking at this, what sort of Ottoman buildings do you think he might have been copying, or his architect was copying? Can you describe what you see? What's the plan of the building? A central dome and 4 semi-domes. Okay. Which earlier buildings have we had with that kind of plan? You remember any? No. Anyone? Some of Sinan's buildings, yes. You're thinking of the Suleymaniye, maybe?
Mm-hmm.
That had 2 semi-domes. Okay. But I mean, it's still fairly similar. This is the plan or the image of it at the ground level. But it's this kind of building. In fact, there are several other Ottoman mosques that have this design, which are later than Sinan's one that we didn't look at. There's the Blue Mosque in Istanbul, if you visited there. There's another one, the Yeni Jami, but this is the earliest one, and this is one that we did look at in class. Remember this one? So we have the same central dome, 4 semi-domes surrounding it. And that's what Sinan's version looks like. This was the Shehzada Mosque, okay, built for the son of Sultan Suleiman, who died prematurely. But what I want you to notice in particular is the difference. So, supposing you're on a slide test and you're asked to compare these, what are the differences? Now, in fact, we're not looking in the same direction here. We're looking at the entrance, and here, obviously, it's the Qibla. So,
It looks like the Muhammad Ali Mosque has less windows, although that could be.
no, that is true. I mean, there are stained glass, but even so,
I mean, it seems
the
like
number
there's
of
much less light.
yes, the number of tiers of windows is markedly different in both cases. Is there any reason why that should be so? Is that just an accident of design, or could it have been deliberate for some reason? Is there any disadvantage to having a lot of light in Cairo as opposed to Istanbul? Yeah. Yeah, it brings with it heat, and the climate in Cairo is very different from that of Istanbul, so that could have been a conscious decision. So that's one major difference. Anything else? Well, the windows and light are the...
Not the windows.
Oh, you mean the artificial lighting? Yeah, well, in fact, that's a consequence of there not being many windows. It's dark inside, so in fact they're using now electric lights in the lamps to light up the interior.
It sort of seems like the plan has less of like, not the semi-domes, but like the mini-domes under the semi-domes.
Yes, yes, very good. That's a major difference. If you have a look here, there is just one simple semi-dome, but supporting it, you just have plain pendentive style below. You don't have the extra exedre, as they have been called. Come on over here. So there's a lot more subtlety in the transition from the base leading towards the dome in the Sinan example. Now, let's have a look at the outside of the buildings, which we haven't looked at before. Nada, do you recognize this building?
Yeah, the citadel.
It's on the Citadel, the name of the building. It's the Mosque of Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
It has very impressive minarets. The Ottoman pencil style is certainly appropriate for this, although instead of the circular shaft, it has an octagonal one, but that's emphasized by the fluting in the lower two stories.
This one also.
This one?
Yeah.
This is
The one behind it.
this one?
Yeah.
That's the same minaret. That's this one.
Oh, it's the same.
We're looking at it from the opposite direction. This is the Qibla direction. This is the direction opposite the Qibla. And these are just turrets rather than minarets at this corner. The lower walls are covered in alabaster, which I think they were actually warned at the time looked nice for a while but didn't weather very well. And it has not weathered very well on the outside, certainly. It's become very pitted, unfortunately. But more importantly, let's do another comparison this time of the outside of another building, an earlier building with the same plan. This again is Sinan's Shehzada Mosque. So Nadim, what sort of contrast do you have here? I mean, the plan is the same. You have a top dome supported by 4 semi-domes.
The arcade on the walls.
Well, you actually have an arcade in the side here. We're not quite looking at it from the same direction. There is an arcade there.
And the niches and the big arches in the walls themselves.
In the Qibla, are you talking about these or
Both.
both? Okay, yes. So at the upper level here, we have one niche at this point, but certainly not the same effect to either side. Anyone, any other major differences?
Also material.
The Qibla side is outside.
Okay, there is a projecting semi-dome which encloses the mihrab in the Muhammad Ali example.
There's no flying buttresses.
There are no flying buttresses in this example, yeah.
So like, while that has like a sort of interesting profile, like that one seems to have like a planar or simpler
Yeah, yeah.
terms of
I mean,
structure.
this has a very sophisticated transition from the square base to the top dome with the elements flowing from one to the other. Here, it looks as if they're just stuck on to a square base.
Kind of like
It's extremely unsubtle.
a waterfall versus a garden pavilion.
Waterfall versus a pavilion is a fair analogy, yes, that'll work too. So the kind of pyramidal, yes, cascading effect you have in Sinan's mosque at the right has been totally lost on the left. So it's if you haven't visited it, it's certainly well worth it, because the sense of space that you get on the interior is the same sense that you get from this plan in the earlier Ottoman buildings. It's extremely impressive. But the subtlety that we had in these earlier examples has disappeared. Okay, supposing you're up on the citadel looking at this, and you go to this little balcony here on the left and you look over, what would you see? Which monuments, which major monuments would you see?
Well, what direction is
This is the Qibla direction. Does that help? You're looking over the Maidan in front of the citadel.
it? Oh, you see Sultan Hassan and their diamonds.
Exactly. You'd have this viewpoint. Well, you probably wouldn't have this viewpoint because this was taken on a smog-free day maybe 15 years ago. So there aren't very many of those left anymore unless the wind's been blowing very, very strongly. So we've looked at the Sultan Hassan Mosque. Now we have a building beside it that was erected in the second half of the 19th century, and it wasn't finished until the early 20th century, which is in what style? Well, look at the minaret, for instance. We just saw a couple of Ottoman minarets on the Muhammad Ali Mosque. Are those Ottoman-style minarets? No. It's Mamluk style. This is the first example that we have of a neo-Mamluk or Mamluk revival style. They call it by both names. And it's been suggested that the original architect of this mosque was an Egyptian. It was built for one of the female members of the royal family at the time. And it included mausoleums for the royal family, as well as being built around the tomb of an earlier Sheikh Rifai, whose shrine existed on the site before this was erected. So, looking at it from the other side, that's the entrance to Sultan Hassan on the right, and the entrance to Rifai, or one of them I should say, on the left, because in fact there are two major entrances. What do you think of this as a building that uses Mamluk vocabulary, elements of Mamluk architecture? What do you think of the way in which they have been fitted together to make a new Mamluk style building? I mean, you've seen some major examples of Mamluk architecture: Qala'un, Sultan Hassan, Barkuk. So how does this measure up to those?
The entrance is deeper.
The entrance is
Smaller, deeper.
is narrower, yes, narrower and deeper, because it's very tall in relation to its width. Is that positive or negative? Negative.
And yeah, most Mamluk buildings have like huge, or
Yeah, I think actually that's one of the major problems of the design from this side especially. You have window recesses
That are larger.
which are much larger than the width for the main entrance. And you expect to come together in the middle for a climax, a visual climax.
The false Mukarna is disappointing.
Well,
At top, like the little
You mean-
not there.
here?
No, not there. The entryway at
This?
Yes.
I mean, that's a semi-dome with a zigzag pattern on
Yeah,
it.
but like, I know it looks,
You think it's trying to imitate Muqarnas?
I think so, but at the same time, I could be wrong.
Yeah, no, there are some other semi-domes, Mamluk semi-domes, that have patterns on them, mostly arabesque rather than zigzag, but it's not exceptional. And then, I mean, they use some of the vocabulary, as I said, like these engaged columns, which are found at the back of the mausoleum of Sultan Hassan. But then the proportion of this with the arch above it, and then the rounded arch here as opposed to the typical pointed one, doesn't seem to fit together very well. Neither does the cluster of these very thin columns on the entrance. These seem rather insubstantial, a bit flimsy compared with the weight of what they're supporting. So let's have a look now at the other facade. This is another entrance that you have on the street immediately opposite Sultan Hassan. So here they've tried to emphasize this facade by having these two Mamluk minarets, and then you have a dome above it, which is on the street. You can see actually that the dome that's above the tomb of Sheikh Rifai is totally invisible from the outside, unless you're a long way away, or standing on top of Sultan Hassan as you are here, which isn't normal. So this is the entrance from the side street. What about this in terms of its use of Mamluk vocabulary?
It's better.
Yeah, well, at least you have, for instance, these engaged columns at the base of the minaret are round buttresses. They're articulated all the way up almost by a series of flanges. I probably should have shown you a photograph from this side here too. There's not quite the same sense of climax of a large doorway or entrance in the middle. They're also very deep, which takes away from some of their emphasis. So it uses Mamluk vocabulary, but not altogether in a successful way. That's on the outside of the building. This is on the inside. And here too, there are elements which combine earlier Mamluk decoration very successfully. This is a large hall which actually is right inside the main entrance that I showed you first. Although it doesn't lead into the mosque, it leads into just this qa-like plan, this reception hall. And I'm actually not sure what it was used for in the original building. I've just been to Katb al-Kitab there recently. And it was a very impressive space for a ceremony like that. But in fact, after this then is the tomb of the Sheikh Rifai. And beyond that again is the main prayer hall. We're looking at it from the side here with the mihrab on the left. But here again, there's the dome that has a lantern bringing light into it, but it's not the climax of the view towards the mihrab. It's not, in fact, in front of the mihrab, as you might expect. And the ground plan is a rather unusual one. It's actually a 9-bay plan. And it's tall, it has fabulous decoration, the actual details of the craftsmanship are superb. But the sense of space is very different from what we get in earlier Mamluk buildings, certainly.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So is the decorations inside the same as it used to be originally? Because I know that the Iranian chef is buried there.
Yeah.
The
Sure.
Iranians put lots of money to renovate the whole mosque. That's what I heard. to renovate it. So
Certainly the chamber where he is buried has lots of fancy marble in it.
yeah.
And his cenotaph obviously is new. But I didn't actually hear about them providing money for a major restoration there. And it looks as if what is there is still in the original style for the most part. It's not certainly not Irani, Persianized in any fashion. Yeah. Can you read anything of this?
Details of the ornaments ornaments from the Alhambra
Yeah, by
Owen Jones.
yeah,
This is a troublesome font.
a troublesome font. Yeah. Anyway, I wanted to alert you to the fact that Owen Jones, who was a British architect, actually together earlier with another French architect, they published plates of architectural details from the Alhambra, and there were lots of spin-offs from this, like this, roughly about the middle of the 19th century. So what's important about that? Well, it was one of the first studies of a major monument of Islamic architecture that was publicized in Europe. The plates were very popular and spread all over Europe. And as a result, I mean, even in Belfast, where I grew up, we had a cinema called the Alhambra. So the Alhambra became a byword for luxury. Well, you can tell from what's showing here that this is a rather old photograph, and in fact the building by this stage was past its heyday. You can see originally when it was built the fabulous detailing on the minarets at either end of the facade, and the details of the decoration on them are likely to have been copied from something like the Alhambra. In the meantime as well, there were other volumes published of details of Islamic architecture, but this remained one of the most influential. And this is some details of the interior of the same cinema. So, interesting combination of what looks like Maghrebi tilework with nice polylobed arches and just, again, more Maghrebi style polylobed arches there, which is appropriate again for Alhambra style details. And then you get buildings like this. This is a synagogue in Budapest. And that's the exterior of one. I didn't get inside this, but it has wonderful neo-Islamic detailing in the pointed horseshoe arches. Or this is the interior of one that, it's a different one actually, which is under restoration. But it has, as you can see, a very close copy of some of the types of stucco decoration that you would have found inside the Alhambra. So this is an example of decoration that could have been copied almost directly from the plates in Owen Jones's book. And in fact, there are surprisingly many synagogues in particular throughout Europe that have this neo-Islamic style, frequently referred to as Moorish, but yes, the rounded horseshoe arches certainly are Maghrebi in style. This is the so-called Spanish synagogue, in fact, in Prague.
No, I mean, it makes sense.
And this is the interior of the same synagogue. Vaguely arabesque style ornamentation. Or here's one which on the outside certainly doesn't look as if it has much in common with any earlier examples of Islamic architecture. This is in a small town in southeast Hungary, Szeged. That's another synagogue, but on the interior we have some, well, what do you call this kind of vaulting? And where did we see it? Well, ribbed vaulting, that could cover a multitude of sins like Gothic architecture. So where you have these arches that crisscross one another. A cross vault is just one that has four groins, like at the back of Bab Nas. But this type of intersecting, yes, net that you get is typical of some Islamic architecture that we saw way, way, way back at the beginning of the semester. It's a squinch net, which the Timurids in particular were responsible for originating the design and for popularizing it as well. And this same type of, I mean, this is one of the ways in which, in other words, Islamic style decoration becomes introduced to Europe. We get it in all sorts of places. This is a synagogue that is in Manhattan. So here we have some nice bits of moshahar, the alternate red and white voussoirs. Also with the horseshoe arches. And then there's another group in America that claimed affinity with the Islamic world. That's the Shriners. I have to admit, I don't know very much about the background of the Shriners. Isabel, do you know anything about them?
Actually, I know a bit because our headquarters are in Tennessee.
Oh, yeah.
They're like, they just started as one of those like neighborhood health associations. They mostly do things with children, such as the Shriners Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
They have like a little small car race to raise money. I forget in which town in Tennessee, although like
Well,
once in
no,
a while
I mean, sure, they're involved in lots of wonderful charitable functions, but why the connection with the Islamic world?
As for that, I
Okay. This is one of their buildings in New York. At least it used to be one of their buildings. And we have our neo-Islamic facade with tile work. We also have, well, we have an interesting style of tile work on the inside. This is the lobby of the same building. What style is the tile work here imitating? It's not an exact copy, but I think it's inspired by some tiles we were looking at recently. Yeah, the Iznik. There is red in it. Yeah, the colors aren't very very good here. It's hard to get an accurate balance, but yes, they're using red together with the dark blue. So I think it's mainly Ottoman inspired. And I mean, so you see the name that is partially effaced on the facade of this building? Medina. This was a Shriners building in Chicago. It's now Bloomingdale's. But what about the details of the decoration here? Where's that coming from? You can see on the spandrels.
Looks like stuff.
Yeah, I think it's trying to imitate something like the Alhambra stucco work. Here's the whole building. So they even have a nice little onion-shaped dome for us to create a sense of exoticism. Okay, so that's an example of the Islamic world exporting its style to the West. But we also have the opposite happening in the late 19th and 20th and 21st centuries, of course. So here's one of the important styles that originated in France and Belgium in particular, and then spread to other parts of Europe. What sort of style is this? Art Nouveau. Okay, new art literally, but it's known by the French term Art Nouveau. And here's a wonderful example from Paris, Castel Béranger. So these flowing lines, whether they're in stone or in metal, imitating naturalistic growth in nature, are typical of Art Nouveau. Asymmetric designs. Anyone know any examples of it in Cairo? Yeah. The best ones are actually in Helmea, and I don't have a photograph of what is the best one, which is a police station, so they're not that keen on you photographing it at the moment. Helmea is where? Anyone know? It's the quarter that was built by Abbas Helmi, which was between the citadel and the old Khalig, Port Said Street. So in fact, it's just back of Port Said Street towards Muhammad Ali Street. And you have, for instance, this fabulous apartment block, which is in a very small side street, and where nobody grand lives anymore, of course, but it has this wonderful Art Deco detailing and stucco on the bricks of the facade.
Is that a minaret? Is that a minaret?
It's a turret. It's a turret. Turrets were popular in European architecture at the time, just for false medieval style buildings. So it's made it more exotic looking. So there are, yes, one or two very fine examples of Art Nouveau in Cairo. And this is part of our architectural heritage in Cairo. So, I mean, buildings like this, which are good examples of any particular style, are worth preserving. It's not an obvious choice, but it's something that the Supreme Council of Antiquity should be considering when they make up lists of the important buildings that should be preserved. Not so far, I think. Yes, Ala?
What about Korba in Heliopolis?
Uh,
It has a very interesting mix. It was built by the Belgian.
Yes.
But it has the Korba
Yes.
is an Islamic style.
That's
and it's a European style.
yeah, it's mostly Neo-Mamluk, actually. Most of Heliopolis. But it is a very interesting mix of styles as well, I agree. And that certainly is very much well worth preserving. There have been campaigns to keep some of the buildings in their original condition. There, at least, there's been more publicity for them. We'll come back to other Neo-Mamluk examples a little bit later. Here's a little villa in Zamalek. It's not an outstanding example of architecture, but it's typical of attractive villas in this particular style. Now, when I say this style, this is a different style. Which style now are we looking at? Art Deco. One that became popular in the 20s, lasted till the 50s or so, and which had emphasized much cleaner lines, less ornamentation on the facades, and a combination of straight and curved lines, lots of curved balconies, such as you see here too. Now this is typical of lots of small villas in Cairo that have disappeared. This is now occupied by a big apartment block, and one of the problems that there is with preserving buildings in Cairo is that there are laws supposedly regulating what can be built, but they're not enforced. And so lots of very fine examples have disappeared. This is probably, I think, what was the finest example of Art Deco in Cairo. And since most of you were barely born in 1982 when it was knocked down. You're too late. This was the Russian Cultural Center in Zamalek, just opposite the Swiss embassy, if you know where that is. That's still in the same place, and I think it's still a hole in the ground. Don't know if they've actually built anything there since then. Presumably they thought they were going to build something massive in its place and then ran out of money.
Sometimes they don't, they just wait for them to collapse.
Oh yeah, oh they encourage them to collapse by, or they cut off water and electricity and encourage any tenants to disappear too. So it's a sad story, but yeah, this was an exceptional building, I think, and it's no more. Another interesting building that you should know. This is where?
Downtown.
This is in Adley Street. This is the synagogue in Adley Street, and it's another excellent example of Art Deco architecture. I mean, here, in fact, they do have some very interesting detailing on the facade, a row of palm trees. Has anyone seen a silent film called Intolerance by Griffith? No, it has very interesting Babylonian sets. Part of it is set in ancient Babylon, supposedly, and this building has always reminded me a little bit of that design. I'm not sure if there's any connection necessarily, but for those interested in the history of cinema, it's an important film, even if it glorifies the Ku Klux Klan at the end.
I don't think my D.W. Griffith
Well, that in particular. It's rather nasty in that respect. Yeah.
So it's worse than Birth of a Nation?
Well, actually, maybe I'm thinking of Birth of a Nation. It's Birth of a Nation is the one. No, Intolerance is more broad-minded, yes.
Intolerance.
Yeah.
Film in support of white supremacy.
No, that's Birth of a Nation. I was getting it confused. My mistake, sorry. Okay, so we have lots of buildings in Cairo and Egypt, and for the most part imitating European styles. But there's one voice crying in the wilderness who tries to bring about a change, whose architectural style we're looking at here. Hassan Fathy. You've heard of Hassan Fathy? So what were his precepts? What was he trying to do?
Yeah.
Anyone know anything about Hassan Fathy?
It was architecture for the poor.
That was the title of one of the books that he wrote, yes. So that was a major theme.
Besides native materials, native styles.
Yeah.
Yes, he tried to copy Nubian vaulting techniques, in particular, domes and vaults. The use of mud brick materials, local materials which were very cheap to make and to build with. This is one of his failed experiments in architecture for the poor. This is the new settlement in Balis, near Kharga, the southern oasis town to the west of Aswan. So it was going to be a new community, but never actually got built in. I mean, it's very attractive in terms of its masses. This, I think, was to have been part of the souk. Obviously, the use of repetitive forms like arches, as with a building like Ibn Tulun, is very impressive to look at. And these little simple architectural details, the triangles, which is very much also in local Nubian style, is also attractive. He won the first Chairman's Award, I think, of the Aga Khan Award for Architecture. And this is from New Gurna, beside Luxor. a village that was designed to house the inhabitants of the old Gorna who made their living by illicit digging on the sites near the Valley of the Kings. That's one reason why they were reluctant to move to the new village, which again wasn't a huge success in terms of encouraging people, whether poor or not, to live there. He used lots of domes, which in a domestic architectural context, it has been suggested, reminded local people of tombs, which was one reason why they were reluctant to live in them. But he has some, very simple but imaginative reinterpretation of traditional forms, such as the dome over the Qibla wall of his mosque in New Gorna. Kind of Iwan leading into it. Here's the mihrab with the very simple squinch, kind of tri-lobe squinch, a little bit of an imitation of Fatimid examples. And a view out from the Iwan looking towards the courtyard, the same kind of very simple Nubian-inspired local brick decoration that we had in Balis. And this was a whole new town, so there was in fact even a theatre that was erected for the community, but I actually have the feeling that it wasn't used very often. So maybe the idea for theatre was too ambitious for the amenities that were present. We had some, let's take a break here before we go on to look at Neo-Mamluk architecture. There were some questions that we had from last time. Okay, someone would like to know more historical information along with the architecture. Yeah, I spent a little bit of time at the beginning of the Ottomans with that, but it's true I could have spent more with the individual patrons. But it's useful to have as much of that as possible. So yeah, that's something I could think about incorporating more in other sessions. What are all types of motifs? Well, that's a bit broad, but there are different ways to divide up. What are the main ways we can divide up, say, architectural decoration and Islamic art? That's a medium, as opposed to a motif. Arabesque would be one, yes. Chinese style is something we've come across, particularly with regards to Ottoman decoration, where they use a special term. What's the special term they use for Chinese style decoration? Hataya. Yeah. Yeah, so that's the combination of lotus leaves, large peony-like blossoms. So we have arabesque. What else do we have? Calligraphy. Geometrical decoration. Those are three of the main ones. I mean, there are obviously lots of subdivisions within those.
European-inspired portraiture.
Well, that's getting into a different category altogether, I think, as opposed to just the non-figural decoration, yeah. Someone would like to see the average architecture and art of the people, not the sultans. How different is it? What do you think the answer to that question could be?
It's a house.
Yeah, I mean, there's a continuum all the way from, a mud brick hut up to a sultan's palace.
No, but in mosques, where there are mosques, normal mosques built by the people.
They don't have the money. The people, unless it has to be someone rich to build a building that's big enough to accommodate lots of people, whether it's even a small neighborhood mosque, never mind a congregational mosque. So
Art history isn't really a history of like
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, what we like to look at in art history are masterpieces, or very impressive works of art. And usually we're talking about patrons who have lots of money to execute what they want. Now, Hassan Fatty's works are example of very simple motifs that are repeated that are based on vernacular architecture. So, I mean, yes, vernacular architecture is also an object of study, but it's not the major part of what art history is concerned with. It's a separate discipline, really. How were Iznik tiles made? Well, how do you make an underglazed painted tile?
No, I was saying that was something that I learned, not.
Oh, okay. Okay. How do we get background? Could we get background information on?
Okay, that was in reference to like on our sheet of paper, like it had at least dates for the manuscript.
Yeah.
It didn't have anything listed for the other stuff.
It didn't, that's true. That's because all of it was from the same period, the first half of the 16th century. So it was really, yeah, just about the same dates as the manuscripts. So, and most of it is in your textbook as well. Here's a view that should be familiar to you as well, although don't know when you were last up in a helicopter. Zainab, what are we looking at? What are we looking at? Something you've seen from a different angle. Big splash of green in the middle of brown. Where is this? Big clue, it's in Cairo. Maggot? No? Nada? No? Nadim? It's Al Azhar Park, built by the Aga Khan. And it's been a huge success as a cultural amenity, or just as a place where people can go and play and picnic. So it's very popular with all walks of life. But it's also interesting because there are a couple of major buildings that are associated with it, restaurants for the most part. There's the Citadel restaurant, which you have back here. And there's the Lakeside restaurant, appropriately named. Here is Salah Salem running beside it. So Salah Salem you probably know very well. So what style is this? This is the Citadel restaurant. And it's by Rami Ad-Dahan, also an Aga Khan Award prize winner for work that he's done in Saudi Arabia. But architecture sponsored by the Aga Khan isn't eligible for any award. So Rami Ad-Dahan gets the commission to build a building for the Aga Khan in Cairo. What has he been looking at when he comes up with this? Which part? All of it? This is left, right, center, top, bottom? Left. Okay, we have, what is it copying? It's like a kutab, yes, very much like a Mamluk Sabil kutab. Not quite the open windows of the Sabil down below, but certainly the top is that. What about the middle part? Four centered pointed arches, ones that have a very sharp curve on the shoulders and then flatten out towards the top, which it's a bit like a keel arch. Which style in Cairo does that resemble? Fatimid, yeah. Why Fatimid?
Because it's so close to Al-Qahira.
Possibly, but there's maybe another reason. to do with the patron Allah?
Yeah, because the
Oh, because the Arab
family is
Shia.
Shia, and in fact, they're Ismailis. They're also claim Fatimid descent. And what about the bit on the right-hand side? This kind of slightly curved roof. Not so much the dome behind it, but the roof line. That's Ottoman style, so it's eclectic. It's throwing everything together at once, and I must say, I myself don't think it fits together very well, but that's just my opinion. Well, he paid a lot. Well, he also paid for this, which is by Serge Santelli, a French architect who also won an Aga Khan Award for a hotel that was built in near Tunis. Yeah, actually, I probably should show some other photographs because there's a kind of, oh, well, actually, this shows it maybe. I'll come back to that. But it's not even that obvious from here. Yes, a nice little fountain inside. Just before this area, there's a kind of stylized 4E1 area with these garden palms in the middle of it. So is this copying any Islamic style? Not so obviously. There's a little bit of banding of the masonry. No, it's not, but I must say I think this is a very successful building. There's a lovely use of a modern variation of mashrabeh and those pavilions at either end, and also as the background for these large rooms as well. Yeah, unfortunately, they've discovered that it simply gets too hot in summer. These umbrellas aren't enough, and they've erected a kind of permanent canvas roof over that area, which looks rather ugly. So that's a miscalculation, obviously. Where's this? Allah knows. Press of Shadows. It's a part of the same complex that includes this. That one's beside El Basyuni Hall, just behind it.
Oh, that's the gazebo
What style is this in?
Confusion style.
Well, actually, it's not quite so clear with those buildings in the background, but the building in the foreground, it's more obvious from this kind of viewpoint. Is this Mamluk? This is by Abdul Halim. And yes, it's more Mamluk than anything else. I think this is a reinterpretation of Mamluk. It's a bit eclectic. That wooden grill covering the two buildings, anybody think of a parallel for that? Zainab, you should know one. Why do I pick on you? Because of your term paper topic. What's this building? Zainab? What's this building? What's your term paper on? And? Yes? That's a big clue. Anyone?
The Urea complex.
Yeah, this is the Horea complex. So, I mean, it used to have wood over the center and then it fell down, but they re-erected it. This is the re-erection, so I think that's what he's trying to copy in this example. And this is actually what I find least successful about the design here, the false arches, which aren't supporting anything, which are there just a signal entrance, but with nothing in the spandrels, look a little bit silly to me. I don't think it works, and we have them all over the place.
Architecture, what with the stripes and pointlessness?
Well, the stripes are okay. That's fine. That's a motif that runs through all of the buildings.
I know, I'm just angry at this.
But yeah, but that's something that I think is less of a success. There are 4 different architects for the campus here. This is the part at the other end, which is by Legoretto, who is a Mexican architect, and I think this is among the most successful part of the design. But it's worth looking to see if you can spot the differences in style between the different areas and trying to evaluate these as examples of modern architecture. This is a building that has been nominated for the Aga Khan Award. Certainly it hasn't won it, but okay, we'll carry on in Sunday's class with more examples of modern architecture.